Do you remember the decision, the moment when you took a decision as a young student to actually get into the IIT, into a IIT? I mean, perhaps at that time you weren't sure which one, but do you remember that moment?
Yeah, actually, that decision seemed to have been done very early in my life. I used to be extremely fascinated by steam engines. So, anytime anybody came or went to the station, the most important thing in my life was to go to the railway station and to just go and stand in front of the steam engine. And I thought I like to be an engineer, and I always thought that the person who used to put the oil on the piston was the most important person, not knowing that he was the lowest paid. So that was because I thought that here's was a man who was doing something to that. And then naturally my parents were not very well off, but after whatever one of the birthdays I was given a mechano set, and I made a lot of very fascinating things besides what was given in the booklet. So always I wanted to be an engineer, and then slowly thing that came that way, do you go for engineering? And IITs were still young because I graduated from my Indian school certificate, or the senior Cambridge used to be called, in 1966, and they were by the time quite a number of students from Lucknow, since I was born and raised in Lucknow, who had gone to IIT. And since the idea was that they are all going to go to America, so that fascinated me very much, and I decided that IIT and IIT Kanpur would be the best thing to go.
Yeah, but why did you choose IIT Kanpur?
Because for two reasons. One, the IIT Kanpur was the best IIT at the time, because for whatever reason, whether it was American aided or whatever it is, that it was supposed to be the best IIT, and secondly, it was very close to my hometown Lucknow. So these are the two things. And since I scored very high in my JEE, so the opportunity came very handy in joining IIT Kanpur. I was very sure that I would like to, since I was a mechanically oriented, to go into mechanical engineering, though we had no idea what mechanical engineering or electrical engineering was all about. And there were no computers at the time. The only computer in India was an IIT Kanpur. It was a very small computer.
What was the reputation of IIT Kanpur, if you can just tell me briefly?
IIT Kanpur had a fantastic reputation primarily because of the fact that we were not taught about what great the teaching was, but the other things, the computer center, the airport, the TV. In fact, there was no TV in India, and yet IIT Kanpur had its own TV center, internal TV center. So these were the things which attracted a young person's mind tremendously. And being associated with and later on we came to realize that some of the, in fact, the who's who of science and technology people in India were all professors in IIT Kanpur.
So this was in 67, right? You
Yes,
joined in
67.
67.
Yes.
So when you entered IIT Kanpur at that time, how old were you?
I was 17 years old.
17. That's
16 and a half.
16 and a half, 17, right? So what was the atmosphere when you got in there? What was it like?
Actually, it was very interesting because you don't have any concept of atmosphere. You just feel that, here is a batch of around 300 students with whom you are entering. You have no concept of what the life is outside that batch. You have no concept about what other things are available, because you do not know very much about other things. So the idea was, since I got very high position, the idea was to compete, and then the whole atmosphere of teaching was so different from what you were taught in schools and etc., that we were quite lost. Then the books that there's all American books, and the whole libraries, and I must tell you that my case was slightly different. I used to study tremendously when I was in high school, and there were excellent libraries in Lucknow, and I used to go to the library, so I was very much involved in that. But the teaching, the quality of teaching, and the whole ambience, and secondly, the most important thing was too much pressure. There was just tremendous pressure that happens in the IIT system, that we bore in the first year itself. So we didn't have any time to even breathe or think about what is happening. But I'll give you a very interesting example. I went to IIT Kanpur. My brother, who was 3.5 years younger, he went to the medical college in Kanpur. And we both went to the same schools in Lucknow. And when my brother went to his medical college, and by the time I was in my third year, fourth year, I could see the tremendous difference in the paths that we had taken. Because the open atmosphere of the inquiry, the thinking, the what you were taught by the overall faculty, it broadened your outlook tremendously. The amount of availability of the literature in the libraries, the whole thing, the whole world open for you. This was the early, 67. Whereas in colleges like, and this was also a very well-known medical college, and how limited the thinking was, that was something which I found very fascinating.
So you're saying that the atmosphere at IIT Kanpur at that time
Yes.
actually helped to open out your
Tremendously. The cream of the, really I must say in those times, some of the best brains came as students. I'm sure that still the quality of students have remained very high. But the discussions, more than our discussions with our professors, is the tremendous interaction with the peers, with our own friends and our seniors, was really amazing. Because when you put in 400, 500 of the brightest people, it's very difficult for them to remain, or you remain to be untouched by the discussions that take place.
Where did all this happen? Can you describe? I mean, did it happen in the halls? Where did all this discussion and this interaction take place?
From 8:30 till 5, we used to be totally cooped up either in the lecture halls or the second, third year. A lot of people started bunking though because they used to late at night. There were no internets, no TVs or etc. Movies you had to go to Kanpur, which was quite far. Our own movies had not started in IIT Kanpur. So all the discussions used to take place in the canteens. Millions and millions of cups. We used to discuss everything in the world because a very bright brain cannot remain inactive. So starting from the sexual life of Sharmila Tagore, because Sharmila Tagore at that time was very important, to the involvement of Americans in Vietnam. And majority of us didn't even know where Vietnam was. But this whole idea that a small country can be wronged by a very big country, and coming from a country like India, which already was not very, was quite a poor country, and so the underdog type of atmosphere. So this was something which really bothered us. So this discussion, and then the discussion was also very much fueled by a lot of students who had started coming from West Bengal, and they were very communist. In those times, Chairman Mao's book was banned, so there's a red book, and they used to discuss. So this was just a very intense. And then the mess, we used to have long lunches and dinners. The lunches were not too long because you had to rush back to school, etc. But dinners were really a great time to discuss this. And I think that is what sometimes I find missing very much nowadays, because the students are very focused. And this was the time when we really used to discuss everything.
There was, I mean, we were just discussing the fact that these communities become a little insular.
Yes.
But are you saying that there was an awareness of the world outside at that time?
Because of the fact that we used to read a lot. The library provided a fantastic, every hall had, we had never read Time or Newsweek and etc. So it made us aware of a lot of things. Then the radio was the only other mechanism. For example, I still remember the landing of the man on the moon in '69, and my goodness, the whole night we were kept awake and discussing the physics of that landing. How much energy would have gone, because we had gone through our physics course. We were taught about how much energy will required in landing for a craft and etc. And all sort of things. They're very fascinating things to discuss at the time. And I think that was because it sharpens your brain, the discussions. Because there are 20 people who will shoot you down. This is not correct. That is not correct. And that sharpens your brain because you come with the better answers. And that element of inquiry and discussion, somehow I feel sometimes is missing because we are too attached now to internet and to other means of communication.
Was there a lot of political awareness among students at that time?
Yes. And I think that, it's a very amazing thing. Probably, the student community all over the world are connected through this wireless. Nowadays it is through internet. In those times it was a human thought. And I'm very aware of that because the turmoil that took place in 1968 was the turmoil that also took place in IIT Kanpur. And for the first time in the history of IIT Kanpur, we had our first strike in 1968 and 1969. And I'm sure that that must have been affected by that because the students read what was happening. Otherwise, we were very much, against, and the whole atmosphere against Vietnam and etc. So this was a revolt against Americans, and more than Americans, was a revolt against the authorities. We had a deputy director called Muthanna, poor guy is dead now, who was a very authoritarian person. Anytime he saw a person, he said the first thing he used to ask, what is your CPI? Since a lot of people didn't have had a very good CPI, so the moment they used to see him, they used to just run away. So his path was always clear, and there was a tremendous resentment.
Was there kind of, when you say politics, was there leftist politics? A lot of leftist?
Yes. There was a very strong element of leftist politics, socialism, and then naturally this was a little later on in 1974 when the Jayaprakash movement came, that this created a lot of very tremendous interest. But the politics was basically a leftist politics at the time.
So, but you had a lot of Americans on the campus.
Yes.
How did they respond to all this?
Oh, they responded very negatively. First of all, America in those times, it was very insular. America, they were the biggest power. They had, 60s were the big thing for America, and then that is why in arrogance they went to Vietnam and etc. And so that arrogance reflected also in the mindset of the professors. So some of the very leftist students wrote, Chairman Mao is our chairman on the road, and they finally figured out who wrote, and they made sure that that boy or those bunch of boys, they had to scrub the road. And that was a tremendous sense of resentment that this was not something that they should have allowed us to do. That could have been done by somebody else. So that was a resentment. Then always there was a preferential treatment which was supposed to be meted out to the sons and daughters of some of these professors. And naturally, so this was, I think, I have a feeling that a lot of us were not even directly in contact with these American professors, but this rumors type of things used to circulate. Oh, this is how they behave. And which I think, being at that age of 18, 19, when you are not mature, this just takes a life of its own. And that is what created the problem, which ultimately ended in this, this strike.
Would you say that apart from the politics, would you say that the Americans who were there at IIT actually contributed somewhat to that kind of atmosphere that you just described of, being open, etc.?
Yes, very much. Because, it was a pleasure to attend their classes. We could see the difference in the Indian professors and American professors. And in fact, it became so hilarious that the classes of Indian professors used to be completely empty. So they started taking attendance, and we would give it attendance and then run away. And we used to tell them that, listen, the classes of these American professors are totally jam-packed. Do you think that we like their faces? Some of them were quite ugly. But the very fact that they taught so nicely, they made us understand. And some of the very courses in physics and chemistry which were very tough. Later on we got some good professors, but initially some of the physics professors were absolutely lousy. And some of the professors, and the way they taught, and then being an American university, American aided, we used to get a tremendous number of films on a lot of these things. And that opened up a whole new world for us. That the way some of the things were so tough in the books, and they were made so easy. And then we realized, what a wonderful thing it is. Because once you become interested in something, it is really a pleasure to know.
So, from what you describe, it sounds as though the IITs, and specifically IIT Kanpur, was a little island, in this country, in the middle of a completely different thing. Did
Quite possible, because after all, it was, where would you learn about television? And, the interesting part was, I still remember, one of the American professors, we were taking a course in electrical engineering. And we were supposed to make a small electrical board with all the transistors and etc. And actually not knowing very much, because everybody, whether you're in mechanical or any other, you have to take 3 years core courses, and we would burn a lot of these transistors, and they were all imported. He told us, I would like you to write down the number of ways in which you can burn the transistor. And that was a really remarkable process. Because once you know how many ways you can burn a transistor, you will be very careful next time not to burn it. So now this type of thing was never taught anywhere. In schools, all our equipment used to be in the locked cupboard. We were never allowed to even touch it. And even when they were put out on the for experimentation, the teacher used to make it. We used to just take the data, etc. And this is also true still in a lot of colleges. And that was a really remarkable process. So all these things, as you start accumulating in 5 years, really gives you a very different thinking process. And mind you, it's also not for everybody. Depends upon what your take into that is. For example, I became one of my best things that happened in IIT Kanpur were my humanities subjects. I thought that was, and I still believe that we should really focus on humanities in all these engineering colleges. And that opened up a totally new thinking besides technology.
But how you got interested in political science, right?
Yes.
How did that happen?
That happened because every one of us has to take electives in humanities. And my father went to jail with Gandhiji, so I was already exposed to this political process. So I just became very interested into this. Though my brother was also exposed to the same political family, but he was not. So it all depends upon. And here was one very famous professor called Ali Ashraf, and I took 2 courses under him. I scored A+. In fact, as I maxed all his exams. He wanted to give me PhD in political science in 3 years. He says I was wasting my time in mechanical engineering. But I thought it was really a wonderful course. And so that is what again opened up your outlook. And mind you, I must also say that in those times we had some of the very, very fine teachers.
Sorry.
There were also some dud teachers which we thought, we used to always feel that American professors are great, but when I went to United States and I found that everywhere in the world, including MIT, you have only 10% or 15% great teachers, and really rest are all duds. Same thing was in.
But you keep saying humanities is important to teach in an engineering college. Why do you think it's important in an IIT, for instance, to teach humanities?
Because first of all, in any college, I would not say single out. IITs, I say because you get really a cream of the students, very bright students. You challenge them either through technology or through humanities, and they will think of very fascinating things. And that is what I personally feel. For example, I'll give you a very interesting, and this came actually in the old times, in Times of India. There used to be a very big editorial, and there used to be a centerpiece. And the centerpiece there used to be in the last one, I forget now what it was. So, and this came from our IIT. We had just finished the psychological course. Psychology was a very important course in the 2nd semester. And so in the 2nd semester, we also had a course on engineering design. And everybody was supposed to make small project on that. So the thing was, as usual, these are all American type things, how to build a better mousetrap. So this he was my classmate. Huh? He had gone through this psychological course. So he developed a mousetrap which said, you put the cheese very close to the mouse. He will try to grab the cheese as much as possible. Ultimately, in frustration, he would think of committing suicide. You hang the noose and he'll commit suicide. Now look at, see, this thinking would not have come without his exposure to the psychological process. So the psychological course. So I personally feel that was, to my mind, you expose these bright students to the humanities, and there's so many fascinating things, because ultimately humanities gives you a well-rounded personality. In fact, whatever I write today is because of the humanity courses that I was exposed to in IIT Kanpur.
Would you say that all the things that you talked about the IIT at that time, the atmosphere of free inquiries, free spirit, etc., was there an appreciation among all of you while you were there, or is this now looking back you realize that was a very special time?
I think it is more looking back now. At that time, it was just the flowering of the intellect, and no limit to that. So you created all sort of very interesting things, but its impact you would not know at that time. And in fact, I think the reason why most of the IITians have become very successful all over the world is because of that. I'm not sure whether the same success rate will continue now, because we are creating